Good morning and welcome to the Daily Aus. It's Thursday, the 9th of April. I'm Zara Seidler.
I'm Billi FitzSimons.
The hostilities between the US and Iran have, for now, paused following a tense couple of days. In the course of a few hours, we went from US President Donald Trump threatening the end of a whole civilization to a two-way ceasefire being announced by both the US and Iran. In today's podcast, we're going to walk through the dramatic timeline and the events that led to the current ceasefire coming into force. But before we get there, just a quick message from one of our brilliant producers of this podcast, Rosa.
Hey, my name is Rosa. I'm the multimedia producer here at the Daily Aus, which means I help edit the audio and video content that you're watching right now. Most recently, it means I've helped the team transition from audio podcast to a full-time video podcast, which you can watch on Apple or YouTube. The Daily Aus is always looking for new ways of doing things, but to continue doing that, we need our audience to grow. One way you can help us is by leaving us a 5-star review on Apple or commenting on episodes on Spotify. It helps our engagement, which helps new audiences find us. And thank you for being a part of the TDA community. Zara, I think we should go through the timeline of what happened on Wednesday morning, because you and I get up quite early for a newsletter that the Daily Aus sends out at 7 a.m. every morning. If you're not subscribed, you should. And we saw that Donald Trump had shared a statement that said that he would end a civilization in Iran.
Yeah.
And we knew that we had to get that out into the newsletter, and we knew there were only a couple of hours before this deadline that he had imposed on Iran. We didn't know what was going to happen, and then it very quickly all suddenly changed right after we sent the newsletter out. Yeah. Take us through the timeline.
Yeah, look, it is dramatic, feels like a strange word to use when you're talking about a war, but the nature and the significance of what Donald Trump was saying was so severe and so dramatic that I think that there's not really another word for it right now. But I do want to just step back one moment, because I'm sure our listeners are now very well across what the context of this war is. But if you are coming to this, or if you might have turned away from the news cycle, just a quick reminder, the US and Israel first started striking Iran on February 28th. In that joint attack, they killed the regime's supreme leader. They launched a major combat operation. They said that this was about ending the nuclear operations of Iran. In response, Iran said it would give a lesson to the US and Israel that it had never experienced in its history. And that sort of language didn't really diminish. Over the last 6 or so weeks, both sides have continued to attack each other. We've seen Iran attack other nations as well, US interests in other nations. And this war has just been really escalating until it reached this boiling point. And so if we then fast forward to this week, because you're right, the timeline of this week is quite remarkable. So a few days ago, Trump announced a deadline for a deal with Iran. Now, that deadline was, I'm going to just talk in US time because my brain cannot convert times at all. So that deadline was the night of the 7th of April. Now, he said that that was the deadline that Iran and the US needed to reach an agreement, or as he was putting it, Iran had to agree to whatever the US had proposed, and that if not, the entire country could be taken out in one night.
And what Donald Trump was asking for was specifically for the Strait of Hormuz to be opened, because that is the world's busiest oil shipping channel. That is what is causing all of these fuel shortages, which is impacting the entire world. And so all of the statements I saw coming from Donald Trump specifically said that Iran needs to open the Strait of Hormuz, which they control.
Yeah, that was, of course, the very explicit tweet, or rather Truth Social.
The Truth Social.
Is that a verb? I don't know. Anyway, where Donald Trump said, open the fucking strait. So I'm quoting the president here. This is not my language. Open the fucking strait, you crazy bastards, or you'll be living in hell. Just watch. Praise be to Allah.
It is remarkable, if we just pause for a moment, to think that that was a statement coming from the US president.
Yeah.
But so much has happened since then.
I know. So it's easy to forget that happened in the last couple of days because of how much this has escalated. So we have Trump announcing this 7th of April, the night of 7th of April deadline. Then on the morning of the 7th of April, so
the morning of this deadline.
Yes.
Yes? You're getting confused with the timelines.
I know.
No, I'm following.
Okay.
I'm following. Keep going.
So At that time, Iran's Karg Island was struck by US forces.
Pause.
Yeah.
Why is Karg Island significant?
So that's the country's primary oil export terminal. Basically, all of it's coming out of there, and it's very closely guarded by the regime. So the fact that that had been attacked was a major escalation and was seen as quite a serious threat against Iran. And so we had that. And then a few hours later, we've kind of talked around it. We got this post from Donald Trump that read, "A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will." Now, as you can imagine, that set off a chain reaction. World leaders from across the globe were responding. Even Trump allies were responding, cautioning the president against that language and against action of that nature. It was the most significant threat that the president of the United States had made against not just the Iranian regime, but the Iranian people. And that was what we woke up to yesterday morning. And it was hours before that deadline. So the deadline was 10 a.m. Australian time. Yesterday. And so there was that post on social media, and then we basically didn't know what was happening until then.
Well, I remember a couple of hours after Donald Trump made that statement, then we had a statement from the Prime Minister of Pakistan, which is one of the key countries that has been mediating these negotiations, which is another interesting thing, that it's not US and Israel and Iran speaking directly. It is through mediators that they are having all of these conversations about a ceasefire. And I remember the Pakistan Prime Minister saying that a ceasefire was a very possible outcome in the next few hours.
Yeah. At that point, he said that the ceasefire talks were progressing steadily. From the outside, it was difficult to understand what was actually happening here, because we had the president of the United States suggesting that an entire civilization was going to be wiped out. But then the key mediator in Pakistan was suggesting that actually a ceasefire could be close. And it turns out that that was the case. So a few hours after, again, the Pakistani Prime Minister's statement, Trump took to Truth Social to announce a 2-week pause in the conflict. There was about 8 hours between his initial tweet about ending civilization and the announcement of this ceasefire. So I can't imagine what had been happening during that intervening period, because it must have just been this flurry of activity to get this deal actually across the line. And it did happen. He said that subject to the Islamic Republic of Iran agreeing to the complete, immediate and safe opening of the Strait of Hormuz, I agree to suspend the bombing and attack of Iran for a period of 2 weeks. That language, which said subject to the Islamic Republic of Iran, a lot of people in our comment section said, so what, it hasn't even been agreed to by Iran. But then shortly after, Iran actually confirmed the pause and announced that they would be opening the Strait of Hormuz for the first time, and that it would be open for these 2 weeks. A lot of things in a short period of time.
Hey guys, this is my friend Rosa. Say hi, Rosa.
Hi, Rosa.
She's cooking up the deep dive video that you're watching right now. Rosa, what do you want them to do?
Subscribe.
You heard the woman. Now back to the video.
Zara, we have this ceasefire.
Yeah.
It's a 2-week ceasefire. So at this stage, it's only temporary.
Yeah, I think it's probably more apt to call it a pause than a ceasefire, because, I don't know, I feel like a ceasefire has a sense of permanence to it. And right now, we don't actually know what happens beyond these 2 weeks.
So does that mean that the war is over? No, because it's only a pause?
Essentially, yes. What we know is that there is a 2-week pause that has been agreed to by both sides. Whether or not that is extended beyond the 2 weeks, we don't know. We've seen in other conflicts that a 2-week pause can mean that it's then extended and that is a permanent ceasefire. In other conflicts around the world, we've seen a pause and then a return to hostilities. So we don't know what will happen in this specific situation. We do know that Donald Trump has said that the US has met its military objectives. So that gives some indication about the appetite of the US to continue this war. We also know that the Pakistani Prime Minister said that the ceasefire applies everywhere. He said, including Lebanon and elsewhere. I do want to say, though, that Israel, and specifically Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has troops on the ground in Lebanon, has said that Israel will not stop fighting Hezbollah in Lebanon. So while the Pakistani Prime Minister said that this ceasefire also pertains to Lebanon. We have the Israeli Prime Minister suggesting that that's not the case and that strikes will continue there. So that's something to keep an eye on. In a broader sense, we've seen some Iranian missiles shot at Israel and Kuwait in the hours after the ceasefire came into effect. That tends to happen where it takes a while for, information to go down the chain of command. But if that continues in the days to come, then that could be seen as a violation, and that will be something that is spoken about by, the US and seemingly Iran.
And just quickly on Lebanon, if anyone is slightly confused by that, because all of the attention has been on the US and Israel's war with Iran, but there has been this secondary war that has been unfolding at the same time between Israel and Lebanon. And I think that is an interesting thing to note, that this has been happening at the same time, and this ceasefire doesn't apply to that.
Correct. And the link, if you're to call it that, is that Iran backs Hezbollah in Lebanon,
which is a terrorist organization.
Correct. And so as we understand it, that conflict will remain ongoing.
And you said before that Donald Trump said that the military objectives had been achieved that the US initially set out. And a big reason he did that was because he was worried about Iran's nuclear capabilities.
Yeah.
Does that mean that now the US and Israel are no longer worried about the nuclear capabilities of Iran?
It's difficult to tell. I guess the way I would answer that is by saying we know what was in previous proposals, previous ceasefire proposals between the US and Iran. What we know is that in a previous plan, the US had proposed to Iran that they had to dismantle their entire nuclear facilities and make a permanent commitment to never develop nuclear weapons. So that language suggests that there was still, in the eyes of the US and Israel, an ongoing threat of Iran's nuclear capability. Iran rejected that proposal, and that is not the proposal that was agreed upon yesterday. We don't have the full contents of what that plan actually looks like. So I don't know how far it goes or whether it does speak specifically to Iran's nuclear capability. Donald Trump, when he made the announcement of the peace plan, didn't say anything about Iran's nuclear capability. As I said, he only said that America's objectives had been met. So it's kind of difficult to answer that either way right now. But this has been an ongoing concern for the US for decades now. So it will be very interesting to see what happens post this 2-week period when it comes to Iran's nuclear capability.
It probably is also a case of they don't fully know the answer to this. I was watching the ABC's Four Corners where they were discussing Iran's nuclear capabilities after the US struck Iran last year. Because this is the second time it's happened in a year.
Yeah.
And they were going there to look at what destruction had been done to the nuclear sites. And they were saying that it's so hard to tell because there aren't boots on the ground there.
Yeah. And I mean, it often takes a period of time. There is a lot of destruction, especially in Tehran and the surrounding areas. And so it will take some time for the US or whoever it is to fully understand whether that capability has been diminished or not. So it's certainly something that we should be keeping an eye on.
To bring it back home, because as we know, the fuel shortages that have resulted from this war has impacted countries all around the world, including here in Australia. Now that the Strait of Hormuz has been opened, does that mean that the fuel shortages will be no longer? Obviously not immediately today, but over time, over the next 2 weeks, will there now be more fuel supply?
I feel like every answer I've given to you is like, not quite.
Yes.
But essentially, the short answer is not immediate. So we're not going to see immediate relief when it comes to fuel prices and the shortage of fuel. And the reason for that is that the Strait of Hormuz has been closed for so long that there's now this almost traffic jam. And there's so much that needs to get through from this backed up traffic that it will take quite a while for things to normalize. That is on the condition that those 2 weeks are extended and that this doesn't then start again. If after 2 weeks the strait becomes closed again, then we can't expect any reprieve from petrol prices or petrol shortages because we're just going to have the same issue almost exacerbated. So essentially, there should be relief if the war stops long term, but it might take some time. And we had Chris Bowden, the energy minister, say, obviously, we hope a ceasefire takes hold and becomes a permanent arrangement. The sooner that happens, the better it'll be for fuel prices around the world. So again, not a clear answer. It all depends on, is this actually going to be a long-term peace or is it just a temporary pause?
It is such a fast-moving story, and we will be keeping everyone updated over on the Daily Aus newsletter and on our Instagram feed and on the podcast.
Exactly.
We'll be back later today with the evening headlines, but until then, we hope you have a good day.